I stood at the edge of the room, my heels sinking into the soft carpet of the community center, the kind of carpet that smells like dust and promises. My name is Evelyn Marie Harper, and I was 48 years old that night, wearing a navy dress I'd ironed twice because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of small-town pride that feels like a performance. It was the annual Willow Creek Gala, the one night a year when everyone pretends we're more than a fading dot on a map. I wasn't supposed to be here. I almost didn't come. But my sister Claire had called me 3 times, her voice sharp with that familiar pity. "Evelyn, you can't just sit at home forever. People are starting to talk." They were already talking. They'd been talking for years. I could feel it in the way heads turned as I walked in, the way whispers followed me like shadows. "There's Evelyn," someone said loud enough to cut through the chatter. "Still alone, poor thing." I kept my eyes on the floor, counting the threads in the carpet, because if I looked up, I'd see their faces. My cousins, my neighbors, the women who used to be my friends. They'd be smiling, but not the kind of smile that invites you in. The kind that says, "We know who you are." Nobody. I found a seat in the back near the folding chairs. Nobody wanted the ones with chipped paint and wobbly legs. There wasn't a place card with my name on it. There never was. Claire had promised she'd save me a spot at the family table. But when I got there, it was full her husband, her kids, her in-laws, all laughing over plates of roast chicken and mashed potatoes. She caught my eye and shrugged, mouthing, "Sorry, Evie," before turning back to her conversation. I didn't argue. I never do. I just walked to the back, sat down, and folded my hands in my lap the way I'd learned to do when the world decides you're invisible. The gala was in full swing now, the mayor droning on about community spirit, the high school band playing something off-key. I watched the room like I was outside of it, like I was looking through a window at a life I didn't belong to. My cousin Tammy was at the center table, her laugh loud enough to carry over the music. She was 35, married to a dentist with 2 kids, and a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "Evelyn," she called out, waving me over like I was a child who'd wandered too far. I didn't move. I knew what was coming. She leaned over to the woman next to her, whispering something that made them both laugh. Then she turned back to me, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "Evie, why don't you come sit with us? You don't have to hide back there. We're family." The room didn't stop, but it felt like it did. Heads turned. Eyes lingered. I felt the weight of their stares, the way they measured me. My plain dress, my graying hair pulled into a low bun, the way I sat too still like I was afraid to take up space. I smiled just enough to be polite and shook my head. "I'm fine, Tammy," I said, my voice steady, though my throat burned. She shrugged like she'd done her duty and went back to her wine. I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out the door past the string lights and the parking lot back to my little house on the edge of town where nobody could see me. But I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe because running would have proved them right. Maybe because I'd spent so many years staying enduring that it was all I knew how to do. I reached for the glass of water on the table, my fingers brushing the cheap plastic tablecloth, and I thought about the last time I'd been in a room like this years ago in a different life. A room where people stood when I walked in, where my name meant something. But that was gone now, buried under oaths and signatures I couldn't break. The mayor was still talking, introducing the guest of honor, some retired colonel who'd grown up in Willow Creek and gone on to do big things. Everyone clapped their hands, loud and eager, like they were claiming a piece of his glory. I clapped too, because it was easier than sitting still. But my eyes were on the door, the one at the far end of the room where the caterers kept slipping in and out. I don't know why I kept looking at it. Maybe I was waiting for something to change, for someone to walk through and see me, not the Evelyn they decided I was, but the one I'd hidden so well, I sometimes forgot her myself. And then it happened. The door opened, not with the quiet shuffle of a caterer, but with purpose. A man stepped through, tall in a suit, so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. Behind him, two others, their faces unreadable, their movements precise. The room didn't notice at first, but I did. I noticed the way they scanned the crowd, the way their eyes moved like they were trained to see everything. The man in the suit raised a hand and the mayor stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. The band faltered. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. Evelyn Harper. The man said, his voice clear, carrying across the room like a command. My heart stopped. Not Evelyn, not Evie. Evelyn Harper. Nobody called me that, not here, not in this life. I gripped the edge of my chair, my knuckles white, and I told myself it was a mistake. It had to be. But he said it again, slower this time, like he was making sure the room heard. Evelyn Marie Harper. Where is she? Every head turned. Tammy's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Claire's mouth fell open, her fork clattering against her plate. I didn't move. I couldn't. My pulse was loud in my ears, louder than the silence, louder than the memory of who I used to be. The man's eyes found mine, and he started walking straight through the crowd, straight to me. The room parted for him, chairs scraping whispers rising like static. He stopped in front of my wobbly folding chair, and he looked at me, not with pity, not with judgment, but with something I hadn't seen in years, respect. Ma'am, he said, his voice lower, now meant just for me. We've been looking for you. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My hands were shaking, and I pressed them against my lap, trying to remember how to breathe. The room was watching, waiting, and I could feel their questions, their confusion, their sudden desperate need to know who I was. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run. But I didn't. I looked up at him, at the pin on his lapel. The kind of pin you don't wear unless you've sworn oaths of your own, and I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was the truth, the one I'd buried, the one I'd thought was gone forever. I'm telling you this story because I need you to hear it, all of it, from the beginning to the end. If it moves you, if it means something, please hit that subscribe button, join this channel, and stay with me. There's so much more to tell, and I'm ready to tell it. But for now, I'm pausing here at the moment everything changed, because I need to catch my breath. I need to remember who I was before I tell you who I am. I sat there in that wobbly folding chair, the man in the suit standing over me, his words still ringing in my ears. We've been looking for you. The room was a blur of faces all turned toward me, their eyes wide with something I didn't recognize. Shock, maybe, or the beginnings of shame. My hands were still pressed against my lap, trying to stop the trembling, but my mind was somewhere else. It was slipping back, pulling me down a corridor of memories I'd locked away years ago. I didn't want to go there. I'd spent so long keeping those doors shut, telling myself they didn't matter anymore. But they did. They always had. I was 26 the first time I stood in a room where nobody knew my name. Not this room, not Willow Creek's community center with its chipped paint and plastic tablecloths, but a room with concrete walls, no windows, and a single fluorescent light that buzzed like a dying insect. It was a briefing room somewhere in Virginia, though I'd never say where, not even now. I was the only woman there, surrounded by men in starched uniforms, their voices low, their eyes sharp. They didn't look at me the way men usually did. They didn't smile or soften. They watched me like I was a weapon, and I suppose I was. I'd been recruited out of college, plucked from a lecture hall where I was studying political science, because someone saw something in me I didn't even see in myself. They called it instinct. I called it survival. The training was brutal. Not the kind you see in movies with obstacle courses and shouting drill sergeants, though there was some of that. It was the other kind, the kind that breaks you quietly. Days without sleep, nights spent memorizing codes, learning to read a room before you step into it, to hear a lie in the pause before a word. I learned to shoot, to fight, to disappear. I learned to carry secrets so heavy they felt like stones in my chest. By the time I was 28, I was leading ops running teams, in places I can't name, making decisions that kept people alive or didn't. I was Commander Evelyn Harper, then not Evie, not the spinster of Willow Creek. I was someone who walked into rooms and made them stand still. I blinked and the memory faded, pulling me back to the gala, to the man in the suit still waiting for me to speak. My throat was dry and I reached for my water glass, my fingers brushing the cheap tablecloth again. I wanted to tell him he had the wrong person. I wanted to laugh it off, to say, "You've mistaken me for someone else," because that's what Evelyn Harper of Willow Creek would do. But I couldn't. Not with the way he was looking at me. Not with the pin on his lapel. Not with the weight of my own name still hanging in the air. I thought about the first mission I led, the one that changed me. It was somewhere hot, somewhere the air smelled like diesel and fear. I was 29, too young to be in charge, but they trusted me because I'd proven I could think faster than the chaos. We were extracting a diplomat, someone important, someone whose name was in headlines I'd never read. The plan went wrong. Plans always go wrong. There was gunfire smoke, a scream I still hear sometimes when it's too quiet. I made a call, a split-second choice to leave one of our own behind to save the rest. We got the diplomat out, I got my team out. But I left a man behind and I carried his name like a scar. I still do. I never told anyone about that. Not my parents before they passed. Not Claire, who thought my long absences were just Evelyn being Evelyn, always running off somewhere. Not the people in this room who thought I'd spent my life doing nothing at all. I couldn't tell them. I'd signed papers, sworn oaths, promised to keep the truth locked inside me. But it wasn't just the oaths. It was the weight of it, the way it changed how I saw the world, how I saw myself. I came back to Willow Creek when I was 40 after I left the agency, or they asked me to leave depending on how you tell the story. I came back because I didn't know where else to go. I thought I could start over, be someone new, but you can't outrun who you are. The man in the suit was still waiting, his eyes steady, patient. I looked past him at the room, at Tammy's frozen smile, at Claire's hands clutching her napkin, like it could save her from whatever was happening. I wanted to stand up, to walk out, to keep the past where it belonged. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I thought about the nights I'd spent alone in my little house, the way I'd sit in the dark and remember. The missions, the faces, the moments when I was more than this, more than the woman they'd decided I was. There was one night years ago after a mission in a city I won't name. We'd stopped a threat, something big, something that would have changed the world if we'd failed. I was 35 at the height of my career, sitting in a safe house with my team. We were exhausted, bruised alive. One of them, a younger agent named Sam, raised a glass of cheap whiskey and said to Commander Harper, the only one I'd follow into hell. They all laughed, but they meant it. I smiled, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know how to tell them that I was just as scared as they were, that I carried every decision like a weight I'd never put down. That was the last time I felt like I belonged anywhere. I blinked again, and the gala came back into focus. The man in the suit took a step closer, his voice lower now, almost gentle. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." My heart was pounding, but I kept my face still, the way I'd learned to do when the world was falling apart. I thought about the years I'd spent here in Willow Creek, letting them think I was nothing. The way they'd call me poor Evie, the way they'd laugh when they thought I couldn't hear. I thought about the silence I'd kept, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Because some truths are too big to share. I stood up slowly, my dress brushing against the folding chair. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the faint clink of a spoon someone hadn't set down. I looked at the man in the suit and I saw something in his eyes, not just respect, but recognition. He knew who I was. Not the Evelyn they'd made me into, but the one I'd been, the one I still carried inside me. I nodded just once, and he stepped back, gesturing toward the door. I took a step, then another, my heels steady on the carpet now. The room was watching, but I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes, their questions, their sudden uncertainty. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who'd walked into that briefing room in Virginia, scared but ready. I thought about the woman I'd become, the one who'd led teams, made choices, carried secrets. And I thought about the woman I was now walking toward that door, toward whatever was waiting for me. I'm telling you this because you need to know it, because I need to say it out loud just once. If you're with me, if you're feeling this, please subscribe, stay for the rest of the story. There's more to come, more I've never told anyone, and I'm ready to share it. But for now, I'm stopping here at the edge of the past and the present, because I need to take a breath before I go further. I walked out of the gala that night following the man in the suit, my heels clicking on the asphalt of the parking lot. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of pine and gasoline, and the black SUV waited like a shadow under the streetlights. I didn't look back at the community center, at the faces I knew were pressed against the windows watching me go. I didn't need to. I could feel their stares, the weight of their confusion, their sudden need to rewrite the story they'd told themselves about me. Evelyn Harper, the nobody. Evelyn Harper, the spinster. Evelyn Harper, the woman who'd wasted her life. They didn't know what to do with me now, and for the first time in years, I didn't care. The SUV's door opened and I slid inside, the leather cold against my skin. The man in the suit sat across from me, his face unreadable, his hands folded like he was waiting for permission to speak. The driver didn't turn around, didn't say a word. The engine hummed and we pulled away, the lights of Willow Creek fading behind us. I should have been scared, or at least curious, but I wasn't. I was tired. Tired of the years I'd spent carrying their words, their pity, their laughter. Tired of the silence I'd wrapped around myself like armor. I leaned my head against the window, the glass cool against my temple, and I let my mind drift back to the life I'd lived here, the one they thought they knew. I came back to Willow Creek 8 years ago after the agency let me go. They called it retirement, but it wasn't. It was a polite way of saying I'd burned out, that the weight of the choices I'd made had finally cracked something inside me. I didn't fight it. I packed a single suitcase, left my apartment in D.C., and came back to the town I'd grown up in, the town I'd left when I was 22 and never thought I'd see again. I bought a small house on the edge of town, a place with peeling paint and a porch that creaked when it rained. I told myself I'd fix it up, make it mine, but I never did. I didn't have the energy. Or maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I thought I deserved the decay. The first year was the hardest. People remembered me, or thought they did. Evelyn Harper, they'd say, their voices bright with curiosity. Where have you been all these years? I'd smile, say something vague about working in the city, and change the subject. But they kept asking, kept digging, and when I didn't give them the answers they wanted, they filled in the blanks themselves. I was a failure, they decided. A woman who'd chased dreams and come back empty-handed. A woman who'd never married, never had kids, never amounted to anything. They didn't say it to my face, not at first. They said it in whispers, in sidelong glances, in the way they'd stop talking when I walked into a room. My sister Claire was the worst, though she didn't mean to be. She'd invite me to Sunday dinners, her house full of noise and warmth, her kids running through the kitchen, her husband carving the roast like he was performing for an audience. Evie, she'd say, her voice soft with that pity I hated. You should get out more. Meet someone. You're not getting any younger. I'd nod, sip my iced tea, and watch her kids play their laughter sharp in my ears. I didn't tell her I'd never wanted what she had. I didn't tell her about the nights I'd spent in safe houses, the missions that left me shaking the lives I'd saved, the ones I couldn't. I didn't tell her because I couldn't and because I knew she wouldn't understand. The town took Claire's lead, and soon it wasn't just pity, it was disdain. At the grocery store, women my age would talk loudly about their daughters' weddings, their sons' promotions, their lives so full they spilled over. They'd glance at me pushing my cart with its single bag of apples and frozen dinners, and their smiles would tighten. Poor Evie, they'd say loud enough for me to hear. Never did figure it out, did she? I'd keep my eyes on the shelves, my hands steady on the cart, and I'd tell myself it didn't matter. But it did. Every word was a cut, small but deep, and I carried them all. There was one moment, maybe 2 years ago, that stayed with me. It was at the church picnic, the kind of event I went to because it was easier than explaining why I didn't. I was sitting on a folding chair, a plate of potato salad untouched on my lap, watching the kids play tag in the grass. Tammy, my cousin, was there, holding court with a group of younger women, her laughter loud and bright. She saw me and waved me over, her smile too wide, too sharp. "Evie, come tell these girls what happens when you don't plan your life." The women laughed, their eyes flicking to me, then away. I smiled because what else could I do? I said something about the weather and walked away, my plate still in my hands, the potato salad warm and soft from the sun. That night I went home and sat in my living room, the lights off, the silence heavy. I thought about the woman I'd been, the one who'd stood in briefing rooms, who'd made calls that changed the world. I thought about the medals I'd never shown anyone, the letters of commendation locked in a safe under my bed. I thought about the oaths I'd sworn, the secrets I'd promised to keep, even from myself. And I wondered if I'd made a mistake coming back here, letting them think I was nothing. But I didn't know how to be anything else, not anymore. The SUV slowed, pulling me back to the present. The man in the suit was watching me, his eyes careful, like he knew I was somewhere else. "We're almost there, ma'am," he said, his voice low. I nodded, though I didn't know where there was. I didn't ask. I'd learned a long time ago not to ask questions when you weren't ready for the answers. I looked out the window at the dark shapes of trees passing by, and I thought about the years I'd spent enduring, the whispers, the laughter, the way Claire would sigh when she talked about me like I was a problem she couldn't solve. I thought about the kindness I'd tried to show, despite it all, helping at the church, bringing casseroles to neighbors listening when they needed someone to talk. I'd done it because it was right, because it was what I had left, but it hadn't been enough. Not for them. I thought about the gala again, about the way Tammy's voice had cut through the room, calling me out, making me small. I thought about Claire's shrug, her sorry Evie, like it was nothing, like I was nothing. And I thought about the man in the suit, the way he'd said my name, the way he'd looked at me. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it was something that would change everything. And for the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I'd almost forgotten. Not anger, not pride, but possibility. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what it's like to carry a truth nobody sees, to live a life nobody believes. If you're with me, if you're feeling this, please hit that subscribe button. Stay for the rest of the story. There's more to tell. More I've kept hidden, and I'm ready to let it out. But for now, I'm pausing here in the quiet of this moment because I need to brace myself for what's next. The SUV stopped in front of a building I didn't recognize, a low, modern structure with glass walls and security lights that cut through the night. It wasn't in Willow Creek, too sleek, too purposeful for a town that prided itself on staying small. I didn't ask where we were. I'd learned long ago that questions like that were pointless when the answers were already unfolding. The man in the suit opened my door, and I stepped out, my navy dress catching the breeze, my heels unsteady on the gravel. He gestured toward the entrance where two guards stood, their faces blank, their hands resting lightly on their belts. I walked forward, my heart steady but loud like a drum in a quiet room. Whatever this was, I was ready. Or I told myself I was. Inside, the air was cool, smelling of polished wood and faint cologne. The lobby opened into a banquet hall grander than anything in Willow Creek, with chandeliers that glittered like stars, and tables set with white linen and silver. People milled about, men in suits, women in evening gowns, their voices low but alive with purpose. This wasn't a small-town gala. This was something else. Something official, something that carried weight. I felt out of place, my simple dress too plain, my hair too ordinary, but I kept my shoulders back, my chin level. I'd walked into rooms like this before, rooms where I didn't belong until I made them mine. The man in the suit led me to a table near the back, not quite hidden, but not prominent either. "Please, ma'am," he said, pulling out a chair. I sat folding my hands in my lap the way I always did when I needed to feel steady. He didn't sit with me. He nodded once, then disappeared into the crowd, leaving me alone. I scanned the room, taking in the details, the way the waiters moved with precision, the way the guests clustered around certain tables, the way the air felt charged like something was about to happen. I didn't know why I was here, but I knew it wasn't by accident. I thought about the gala back in Willow Creek just an hour ago, though it felt like a lifetime. The way Tammy's laugh had sliced through the room, the way Claire's shrug had left me standing alone. I thought about the years I'd spent swallowing their words, their pity, their disdain. Poor Evie, they'd say, their voices dripping with false concern, never did anything with her life. I'd let them think it because it was easier than explaining, because the truth was a weight I couldn't share. But sitting here in this room with its chandeliers and its secrets, I felt that weight shift like a stone starting to roll. A woman approached my table, her dress a deep burgundy, her hair swept into an elegant twist. She was younger than me, maybe 35, with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing your place in the world. "You must be Evelyn," she said, her smile polite but curious. I nodded, unsure what she wanted. "I'm Rachel," she said, sitting across from me without asking. "I heard you were coming. Everyone's been talking about it." Her words were light, but her eyes were sharp, studying me like I was a puzzle she hadn't solved. I didn't respond. I'd learned to let silence do the talking when I wasn't sure what to say. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "They say you're a legend, you know, the kind of person they tell stories about in training." I froze, my hands tightening in my lap. A legend. The word felt foreign, heavy, like it belonged to someone else. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I was just Evelyn Harper, the woman who lived in a creaky house on the edge of Willow Creek, the woman nobody noticed. But I didn't. I smiled just enough to be polite and said, "I'm just here for the evening." She laughed like I'd told a joke, but her eyes didn't leave mine. "Sure," she said, "if you say so." The room began to fill, the hum of conversation growing louder. I saw men with medals pinned to their chests, women with badges clipped to their dresses, their faces serious but proud. This was a ceremony, I realized, a gathering of people who'd served, who'd sacrificed, who'd carried secrets like I had. I felt a pang, sharp and sudden, for the life I'd left behind. The briefings, the missions, the moments when I'd been more than myself. I pushed it down, focusing on the table, the napkin folded in front of me, the water glass sweating in the warm air. Then I saw her, Claire. She was here somehow, standing near the entrance, her eyes wide as she took in the room. She was still in her gala dress, a pale green thing that looked out of place among the formal attire. Next to her was Tammy. Her face flushed, her hands, clutching a small purse like it could anchor her. I didn't know how they'd gotten here or why, but I felt a knot form in my chest. They didn't belong here. This wasn't their world, but they were looking for me, their heads turning, their eyes scanning the crowd. When Claire saw me, her face softened with relief, but Tammy's tightened her lips, pressing into a thin line. They made their way to my table, weaving through the crowd, their steps hesitant. Evie Claire said, her voice low, almost a whisper, "What is this place? Why are you here?" She sounded scared, like she'd stumbled into something she didn't understand. Tammy didn't say anything, but her eyes were on me, sharp and accusing, like I'd betrayed her by being here. I didn't answer right away. I looked at them, at the way they stood so close together, like they needed each other to face me. I thought about all the times they'd dismissed me, all the times they'd laughed or sighed or looked away, and I felt something harden inside me, not anger, but resolve. "I was invited," I said, my voice calm, steady. Claire frowned like she didn't believe me. "Invited by who, Evie? This doesn't make sense. You don't belong here." Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard them before in different forms from her, from Tammy, from the whole town. Tammy finally spoke, her voice loud enough to draw glances. "This is ridiculous, Evie. You're embarrassing yourself. Let's just go home." She reached for my arm like she could pull me out of this place, out of this moment. I moved my arm away just enough to stop her, and I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. "I'm staying," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Tammy's face reddened, but she didn't say anything else. Claire looked between us, her hands twisting together, her eyes pleading. "Evie, please, just tell us what's going on." I wanted to. I wanted to tell them everything, the missions, the sacrifices, the woman I'd been, but I couldn't. Not because of the oaths, not because of the secrets, but because they wouldn't understand. They'd never understood. The lights dimmed and a hush fell over the room. A man stepped onto the stage at the front, his uniform crisp, his chest heavy with medals. He was older, maybe 60, with a face that looked like it had seen too much. The crowd straightened their faces serious, their hands still. I felt Claire and Tammy shift beside me, their discomfort palpable, but I didn't look at them. My eyes were on the man, on the way he stood, on the weight of his presence. I knew that weight. I'd carried it once. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice deep commanding, "tonight we honor service. Tonight we honor sacrifice." The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels alive, expectant. I felt my pulse quicken, though I didn't know why. I thought about the man in the suit, the way he'd said my name, the way he'd looked at me. I thought about the years I'd spent hiding, enduring, waiting, and I wondered for the first time if this was why I'd been brought here. Not to hide, but to be seen. I'm telling you this because I need you to feel it, the weight of being invisible, the spark of being found. If you're with me, if you're holding this moment, please subscribe, stay for what's coming. There's more to this story, more I've never said, and I'm ready to say it. But for now, I'm pausing here in the quiet before the storm, because I need to steady myself for what's next. The man on the stage stood tall, his voice steady, each word landing like a stone in still water. "We gather tonight," he said, "to honor those who've served in silence, whose sacrifices remain unseen." The room was so quiet I could hear the faint clink of ice in someone's glass, the soft rustle of a napkin being folded. My hands were still in my lap, but they weren't steady anymore. My pulse was loud, a rhythm I couldn't ignore, and I felt something shift inside me, something I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten it was there. Claire and Tammy were still beside me, their presence heavy, but I didn't look at them. My eyes were on the man on the way. His gaze swept the room, searching, deliberate. I thought about the SUV, the man in the suit, the way he'd said my name back at the Willow Creek Gala. Evelyn Marie Harper. Not Evie, not the woman they'd laughed at, but the name I'd carried in another life. I thought about the years I'd spent in Willow Creek swallowing their words, their pity, their disdain. The way Tammy's laugh had cut through the air, the way Claire's sorry Evie had left me standing alone. I told myself it didn't matter that I could carry it, that I was stronger than their judgment. But sitting here in this room with its chandeliers and its weight, I wasn't so sure anymore. The man on the stage paused, his hands resting on the podium, and the room seemed to lean forward, waiting. He was a general, I realized, though I didn't know his name. The medals on his chest gleamed under the lights, each one a story, a sacrifice. I'd had medals once locked away in a safe under my bed, never shown to anyone. I told myself they didn't matter, that they were just metal, just moments I'd left behind. But now, watching him, I felt a pang, sharp and sudden, for the woman I'd been. The one who'd stood in briefing rooms, who'd made choices that changed lives, who'd carried secrets so heavy they'd cracked something inside her. "We have a special guest tonight," the general said, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "Someone whose service has been extraordinary." The word hung in the air, heavy, alive. I felt Claire shift beside me, her breath catching, but I didn't look at her. My eyes were locked on the general, on the way his face changed, the way his jaw tightened like he was holding something back. "This is a person," he continued, "who led operations that saved countless lives, who made decisions most of us could never imagine. A person who, for reasons of duty and honor, has remained in the shadows." The room was silent, but it wasn't the silence of Willow Creek, the silence of pity or boredom. This was different. This was respect. I felt it in the way the crowd sat still, the way their eyes followed the general, the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath. I thought about the missions, the ones I could still see when I closed my eyes. The desert heat, the crack of gunfire, the weight of a decision made in a heartbeat. I thought about the people I'd saved, the ones I hadn't, the names I carried like scars. I thought about the oaths I'd sworn, the secrets I'd promised to keep, even from myself. The general stepped away from the podium, and the room shifted, heads turning as he moved toward the side of the stage. Two men in suits appeared, the same precise movements I'd seen in the man who'd come for me. They scanned the crowd, their eyes sharp, and then one of them pointed toward me. My heart stopped. Not a beat, not a flutter, just a sudden hollow stillness. I told myself it was a mistake, that they meant someone else, someone important. But the general was walking now straight through the crowd. His steps measured his eyes fixed on my table. Claire gasped, her hand grabbing my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Evie," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What's happening?" Tammy was silent, but I could feel her staring, her eyes boring into me like she could will this moment away. I didn't move. I couldn't. My hands were frozen in my lap, my breath caught in my throat. The general stopped in front of my table, and the room went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it could break the world. "Evelyn Marie Harper," he said, his voice clear, carrying to every corner of the room. My name. My full name spoken with a reverence I hadn't heard in years. I felt the weight of it, the way it settled over me, heavy but warm, like a cloak I'd forgotten I owned. The general's eyes met mine, and I saw something there. Not just respect, but gratitude, the kind that comes from knowing what it costs to carry what I'd carried. "Ma'am," he said, his voice softer, now meant just for me. "We've been looking for you." The room was watching every face turn toward me, every breath held. I felt Claire's hand loosen on my arm, felt Tammy's stare shift from accusation to confusion. I wanted to look at them, to see their faces, to know what they were thinking now, but I didn't. I kept my eyes on the general, on the man who'd said my name, like it meant something, like it was worth something. I thought about the years I'd spent hiding, letting them think I was nothing, letting them laugh and whisper and pity. I thought about the woman I'd been, the one who'd led teams, who'd faced chaos and come out the other side. And I felt something crack inside me, not pain, but release. "Commander Harper," the general said, and the word hit me like a wave. Commander! My title, my truth, spoken aloud for the first time in years. The room gasped, a soft, collective sound, but I barely heard it. My ears were ringing, my heart pounding, my mind racing back to the moments that had earned me that title. The missions, the sacrifices, the nights I'd spent alone wondering if I'd done enough, if I'd been enough. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but no words came. I was shaking, not visibly, not in a way anyone could see, but inside where it mattered. The general extended his hand, not to shake, but to help me stand. I hesitated. My hands still in my lap, my body rooted to the chair. I didn't know if I could do this, if I could step into this moment, if I could be her again. But his eyes were steady, his hand unwavering, and I knew I didn't have a choice. Not anymore. I placed my hand in his, my fingers trembling, and I stood my dress brushing against the chair, my heels steady on the polished floor. The room rose with me, a wave of movement, chairs, scraping hands, clapping the sound building until it filled the space, loud and alive. I looked out at the crowd, at the faces I didn't know, at the respect in their eyes, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind, the kind that lives in your bones. I thought about Willow Creek, about the gala, about the way they'd looked at me, the way they'd laughed, and I thought about this moment, about the general, about the truth that was finally free. I'm telling you this because I need you to feel it, the weight of being unseen, the power of being found. If you're with me, if you're holding this truth, please subscribe, stay for what's next. There's more to this story, more I've kept locked away, and I'm ready to let it out. But for now, I'm pausing here in the moment. Everything changed because I need to breathe before I go further. I stood there, my hand still in the general's, the room a sea of faces all watching me. The applause was loud, relentless, but it felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. My name, Commander Evelyn Marie Harper, hung in the air, spoken with a weight that made my chest ache. I wanted to look down, to hide, to slip back into the shadows where I'd lived for so long. But the general's grip was steady, grounding me, and his eyes held mine with a quiet insistence, like he knew I could carry this moment even if I didn't believe it myself. I felt Claire's presence beside me, her breath uneven, and Tammy's silence sharp and heavy. But I didn't look at them. I couldn't. Not yet. Commander Harper the General said again, turning to the crowd, now his voice cutting through the applause until it faded into silence. This woman led operations that shaped our nation's security. She made choices under pressure that most of us could never comprehend. She saved lives, hundreds, thousands, though she'll never tell you that herself. He paused, and the room seemed to lean in, every eye on me, every breath held. I felt exposed raw, like a wound laid bare. I wanted to protest, to say it wasn't like that I was just doing my job. But the words wouldn't come. They were stuck, tangled in the truth I'd buried for years. I thought about the mission that defined me, the one I still carried like a stone in my heart. It was 2009, somewhere in Eastern Europe, a city where the streets smelled of coal and desperation. I was 32, leading a team of 6, tasked with stopping a transaction that could have sparked a war. The details are still classified, locked behind oaths I'll never break, but I can tell you this, it went wrong. We were ambushed, pinned down in a warehouse with no way out. My second in command, a man named Daniel, was bleeding out his hand, gripping mine, his eyes begging me to make it right. I had to choose, save him or complete the mission. I chose the mission. We stopped the transaction, saved the lives we were sent to save. But Daniel didn't make it. I carried his body back, and I carried his name ever since. The general was still speaking, his voice low, reverent. Commander Harper was known as Vanguard in the field, the first and the last out. Her teams trusted her with their lives, and she never let them down. Vanguard. My code name, the one I hadn't heard in over a decade, the one I'd thought was dead. Hearing it now in this room with these people felt like a resurrection, painful and bright. I felt my knees tremble, but I locked them, standing taller, because that's what Vanguard would do. That's what I'd always done. I glanced at the crowd, at the men and women in uniforms and suits, their faces, a mix of awe and respect. Some were younger, their eyes wide like they were seeing a legend come to life. Others were older, their nods subtle like they knew the cost of what the general was describing. I wondered what they saw when they looked at me, a woman in a plain navy dress, her hair graying her hands, shaking just enough to betray her. Did they see the commander? Or did they see the woman I'd become, the one who'd let Willow Creek convince her she was nothing? The general turned back to me, his voice softening. "Ma'am, we owe you a debt we can never repay, but tonight we can start." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, black velvet, the kind that holds something sacred. My breath caught. I knew what it was before he opened it, a metal gleaming under the chandeliers, its ribbon a deep blue. The distinguished service medal, he said, holding it up for the room to see, for extraordinary heroism and leadership in the face of impossible odds. The room erupted again, applause and murmurs, but I barely heard it. My eyes were on the medal, on the way it caught the light, on the weight it represented. I'd received medals before in quiet ceremonies in rooms with no windows, no crowds. But this was different. This was public, deliberate, a declaration. I wanted to say I didn't deserve it, that others had done more, sacrificed more. But the general's eyes stopped me, and I saw something in them, pride, not just for me, but for what I represented. I nodded just once, and he pinned the medal to my dress, his hands steady his touch, careful like he was handling something fragile. I turned to the crowd, and for the first time, I let myself look at Claire and Tammy. Claire's face was pale, her eyes wet, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked like she was seeing me for the first time, like the sister she'd pitied, the one she'd sighed over, was gone. Tammy was different. Her mouth was open, her eyes wide, but there was something else there. Shock, yes, but also fear, like she'd realized she'd misjudged something dangerous. I didn't smile at them. I didn't need to. My silence said enough. The general stepped back, and the room rose a wave of movement chairs, scraping hands, clapping. I stood there, the medal heavy against my chest, and I felt the years fall away. The missions, the choices, the nights I'd spent alone wondering if I'd done enough. They were all here in this moment, in this room, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide them. I thought about Daniel again, about the warehouse, about the choice I'd made. I thought about the people I'd saved, the ones I hadn't, the ones who'd trusted me to lead them. And I thought about Willow Creek, about the whispers, the laughter, the way they'd called me poor Evie, and thought they knew me. I wanted to say something to the crowd, to the general, to Claire and Tammy, who were still staring like I was a stranger. But I didn't. I'd learned long ago that words could be weapons, but silence could be power. So I stood there, my head high, my hands steady now, and I let the moment speak for itself. The general gestured for me to sit, but I shook my head just slightly. I wasn't ready to sit. Not yet. I'd been sitting for too long. The applause began to fade, and the general leaned in his voice low, meant only for me. "There's more, ma'am. We need to talk. After." I nodded, my throat tight, my mind racing. More. Of course there was more. There was always more. But for now, I was here in this room with my name, my title, my truth laid bare. I felt the medal against my chest, the weight of it, the honor of it, and I let myself feel something I hadn't in years. Not just pride, but peace. I'm telling you this because I need you to know what it's like to carry a truth that changes everything, to stand in a moment that rewrites your story. If you're with me, if you're feeling this, please subscribe. Stay for what's coming. There's more to this. More I've never shared, and I'm ready to let it out. But for now, I'm pausing here in the heart of the reveal because I need to hold this moment before I move forward. The room was still buzzing, the applause fading into a hum of whispers and shifting chairs. But I felt like I was standing in a vacuum, the air too thin, the world too quiet. The metal pinned to my dress was heavy, its ribbon brushing against my collarbone, a reminder of everything I'd carried and everything I'd hidden. The general had stepped back, his face unreadable now, but his nod was enough, a silent acknowledgement that this moment was mine. I was still standing, my heels firm on the polished floor, my hands no longer trembling. I felt the eyes of the crowd, the weight of their respect, their curiosity, their sudden need to understand who I was. But it was Claire and Tammy still at my table, who pulled my focus, their faces like mirrors reflecting a truth they couldn't escape. Claire's eyes were red, her hands twisting the edge of her napkin into a knot. She looked small, smaller than I'd ever seen her, like the sister who'd always been the louder one. The brighter one had shrunk in the shadow of this moment. Tammy was different. Her face was flushed, her lips tight, her eyes darting between me and the crowd like she was searching for a way to rewrite what had just happened. I didn't move, didn't speak. I let the silence stretch, let it fill the space between us, because I'd learned long ago that silence could say more than words ever could. The general raised a hand, and the room settled, the whispers dying out. "Commander Harper," he said, his voice steady, "has served this nation with a courage and dedication that few can match. Tonight we honor her, not just for what she did, but for what she continues to carry." He paused, his eyes finding mine again, and I saw something there, gratitude, yes, but also a question like he was asking me to step into this moment fully to claim it. I nodded just slightly because I understood. I'd been running from this for years, but I couldn't run anymore. The crowd rose again, not just clapping now, but standing their hands coming together in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Men in uniforms saluted, their movements crisp, their faces solemn. Women in evening gowns pressed their hands to their chests, their eyes shining. I saw Rachel, the woman who'd sat with me earlier, standing near the front, her smile wide but reverent, like she'd known this was coming. I felt the weight of their respect, not just for me, but for the life I'd lived, the choices I'd made, the secrets I'd kept. It was overwhelming, but it was also right. Like a piece of me I'd lost was finally clicking back into place. I thought about Willow Creek, about the gala just hours ago, about the way Tammy's voice had sliced through the room, calling me out, making me small. Evie, come tell these girls what happens when you don't plan your life. I thought about Claire's shrug her sorry Evie as she left me to sit alone in the back. I thought about the years I'd spent enduring their whispers, their pity, their laughter. Poor Evie never did anything with her life. I'd let them think it because it was easier than explaining, because the truth was a burden I couldn't share. But now standing here with the general's words still echoing with the metal against my chest, I realized I didn't have to carry that burden alone anymore. Claire moved first, stepping closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Evie," she said, her eyes wet, her hands reaching for mine. "I didn't know. I'm so sorry." Her words were fragile, breaking under the weight of her regret, and I saw the sister I'd grown up with, the one who'd once braided my hair and shared my secrets before life pulled us apart. I wanted to be angry to tell her she should have known that she should have seen me, but I wasn't. I was tired not of her, but of the distance between us, the distance I'd let grow because it was safer than the truth. I squeezed her hand just once and let go. "It's okay," I said, my voice soft but steady. It wasn't okay, not really, but it was enough for now. I didn't need her to understand everything, not yet. I just needed her to see me, to know I was more than the woman she'd pitied. She nodded, tears spilling over, and stepped back, her hands clutching her napkin again, like it could hold her together. Tammy was next, her face a storm of emotions, shock, embarrassment, something close to fear. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes flicking to the crowd, to the general, to the medal on my dress. "Evie," she finally said, her voice too loud, too forced. "Why didn't you tell us all this time? You let us think." She trailed off her hands, gesturing vaguely, like she could wave away the years of her laughter, her taunts, her smug certainty that she knew me better than I knew myself. I looked at her. Really? Looked at her. And I saw the woman who'd always needed to be the center. The one who'd filled the silence with her own story because she couldn't stand the quiet. I could have told her the truth that I didn't tell her because I couldn't. Because the oaths I'd sworn were bigger than her curiosity, because her laughter had made it easier to stay silent. But I didn't. I said I didn't need to explain myself, Tammy. My voice was calm, but there was steel in it, the kind I'd used in briefing rooms in moments when lives depended on my clarity. She flinched just slightly and looked away, her face red, her hands empty now with nothing to hold on to. The general gestured toward the stage, and I understood he wanted me to speak, to say something to the room, to the people who'd stood for me, saluted me, honored me. I hesitated, my throat tight, my mind racing. I wasn't ready, wasn't sure I could find the words to match this moment. But I stepped forward, my heels clicking on the floor, the metal a steady weight against my chest. The crowd quieted their eyes on me, expectant, respectful. I stood at the podium, my hands resting lightly on its edge, and I looked out at them, at the faces I didn't know, but felt connected to, bound by the same unspoken truths. I don't have much to say. I began, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. I did my job. I made choices. I carried them. That's all. I paused my eyes, finding the general, then Rachel, then the younger agents in the crowd, their faces bright with something I recognized, hope maybe, or pride. If there's anything I've learned, I continued, it's that service isn't about recognition. It's about doing what's right, even when no one sees it, especially when no one sees it. The room was silent, but it was a good silence, the kind that listens. I nodded, stepped back, and the applause came again, softer this time, but no less real. The general joined me, placing a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt like a salute. He leaned in, his voice low. "There's a meeting after this, ma'am. We need you." I nodded, though I didn't know what he meant, not yet. I didn't need to. I'd been needed before, and I'd answered the call. I would again. I'm telling you this because I need you to feel the shift, the moment when silence becomes strength, when regret meets reverence. If you're with me, if you're holding this, please subscribe. Stay for the rest. There's more to this story, more I've kept inside, and I'm ready to share it. But for now, I'm pausing here in the aftermath of truth because I need to steady myself for what's coming. The banquet hall began to empty, the crowd dispersing into clusters of murmured conversations, their voices softer now, like the hum of a machine winding down. The chandelier still glittered overhead, but their light felt gentler, less like a spotlight and more like a glow. I stood near the edge of the stage, the metal still pinned to my dress, its weight a quiet reminder of the moment that had just passed. The general was gone, called away to a private meeting, but he'd promised we'd speak soon. His words, "We need you," lingered in my mind, heavy with possibility, but for now, I let them rest. I was tired, not in my body, but in my soul, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something too long and finally setting it down. Claire and Tammy were still at the table, their faces pale, their hands idle. Claire kept glancing at me, her eyes searching like she was trying to find the sister she thought she knew. Tammy hadn't spoken since her stammered attempt at an apology, and I was glad for it. I didn't want her words, not now. I didn't need them. The room was thinning out, the waiters clearing plates, the air growing cooler as the night settled in. I knew I should go to them, say something to ease the tension, but I didn't move. I wasn't ready to bridge that gap, not yet. Maybe not ever. I thought about the years in Willow Creek, the way I'd let myself fade into the background, the way I'd folded my past into a box and locked it away. I thought about the house on the edge of town, its peeling paint, its creaky porch, the place I'd called home, but never really lived in. I'd gone there to disappear, to be someone small, someone safe. But I wasn't that woman, not really. I was Commander Evelyn Harper Vanguard, the one who'd led teams, made choices, carried scars. And tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like her again, not in a loud, triumphant way, but in a quiet, steady one, like a fire that had never gone out, just burned low. I walked to the table, my heels soft on the polished floor, and Claire stood, her hands twisting together. "Evie," she said, her voice breaking. "Can we talk, please?" I looked at her, at the lines around her eyes, the worry in her face, and I saw the sister I'd loved, the one I'd lost somewhere along the way. I nodded, not because I wanted to talk, but because I knew she needed it. Tammy stayed seated, her eyes on the table, her silence louder than any words she could have said. We stepped outside into the cool night air, the stars sharp above us. The SUV was still there, its driver waiting, but I waved him off. I needed a moment, just a moment to breathe. Claire stood beside me, her arms crossed her breath, visible in the chill. I didn't know, she said again, her voice small. "All those years I thought you were just lost. I should have asked. I should have listened." Her words were heavy with regret, and I felt them, but they didn't cut like they might have before. I was past that now. "You couldn't have known," I said, my voice steady, my eyes on the stars. "I didn't let you. It was the truth, and it was enough." I didn't tell her about the oaths, the missions, the nights I'd woken up shaking the names I carried. I didn't need to. She saw me now, not the whole of me, but enough to know I was more than the woman she'd pitied. She reached for my hand, and I let her take it, her fingers warm against mine. We stood there silent, the gap between us still there, but smaller, softer. Tammy joined us, her steps hesitant, her face still flushed. "Evie," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm sorry. I was wrong." It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me, and I felt it not as a victory, but as a release. I looked at her, at the woman who'd laughed, who'd mocked, who'd thought she knew me, and I saw her for what she was, someone who'd filled her own emptiness with noise. I didn't need her apology, but I accepted it, because it wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I know I said, and that was all. I didn't need to say more. I turned back to the stars, my breath steady, my heart quiet. The metal was still there, a weight I could carry now, not as a burden, but as a truth. I thought about the general, about the meeting he'd mentioned, about the possibility of stepping back into that world, or at least a piece of it. I didn't know if I would, not yet, but I knew I could. That was enough. The next day, I went back to Willow Creek, to my little house with its creaky porch. The town was different now, or maybe I was. People looked at me not with pity, but with curiosity, with a flicker of respect they didn't know how to name. I didn't explain myself. I didn't need to. I went to the church picnic, sat in the same folding chair, ate the same potato salad. But when Tammy waved me over, her smile, cautious, I didn't go. I smiled back just enough and stayed where I was. Claire called me later, her voice softer, asking me to Sunday dinner. I said I'd think about it, and I meant it. That night, I went to my bedroom, to the safe under my bed. I opened it, the hinges creaking, and took out the box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the medals, the letters, the fragments of a life I'd thought was gone. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. I closed the box, locked the safe, and stood up, my reflection faint in the window. I saw her commander, Harper Vanguard Evelyn, not as a ghost, but as me. I folded the flag I kept on my dresser, the one from Daniel's funeral, and I put it away not to hide it, but to let it rest. I'm telling you this, all of you, because I need you to hear it, to feel it, to know that your truth doesn't need to be loud, to be powerful. You don't need to explain your past to anyone. It lives in your spine, in the way you walk, and the choices you make when no one's watching. I carried mine in silence, and when the time came, it spoke for itself. If you're with me, if you've felt this journey, please subscribe. Stay with this channel, because there's more to share, more stories to tell. But for now, I'm ending here with a quiet moment of peace, not triumph, but grace. I'm walking out the door, my head high, my heart steady, ready for whatever comes next.